Look at these two drawings of a cartoon cat. Both are fairly stylized and simple, but the second one feels more 3D. Most of the time, this is what you want. It shouldn't feel like lines on paper, but like the paper is a window to a 3D world behind it. Want to level up your drawing skills? In this mini-series, let's explore what techniques and tricks make your characters seem more three-dimensional. Instead of drawing flat shapes, you should draw 3D forms. This advice is very often given to beginners, and it's a clear case of easier said than done. What does that even mean? I think one easier way to approach it is by thinking of what our goal is with 3D forms. When you use 3D forms, your image contains more information. The flat cat only has stacking to show depth. The body is behind the face, the tail is behind the body. And that's pretty much it in terms of depth. We don't know how close the cat is to the horizon or the camera. Only in the more 3D-ish drawing we have more information. The shifted nose here indicates that the muzzle area actually has a depth. The squeezed eye really sells the 3/4 turn and the illusion that this eye is mapped alongside a sphere. The paws have a position at different points of depth on the surface of the floor, and we can see that the cat body has a side and a front plane. So when you make your drawing more 3D, it contains more information about positions, lengths, and angles. It creates the illusion of a point of view from which we are looking at the subject of our drawing. And that is the big shift in thinking that you have to make. Instead of just collecting shapes on the surface of the paper now is a camera with a fixed position in a constructed 3D environment that sits behind the paper. This camera is positioned in relation to your characters, for example, above or below them. So what can you do to make your characters have this 3D perspective? You can reveal something about their depth and how they are twisted and tilted in 3D space. This character is facing us fully frontal. Usually you don't want a character to face the viewer like this, but you want the character to be leaned or tilted towards things and other characters in their surrounding. You can use layer stacking by putting one arm behind and one arm in front of the body to create a little bit of a 3/4 twist, maybe shift the facial features over to one side accordingly. Now it looks more like the character is reacting to something in their world towards the side, but the drawing is still very flat. By the way, one thing that many beginners do when they realize their characters need to face things inside their world more is to turn them completely sideways. Now, these two characters are definitely facing each other, but the viewer has a hard time seeing the facial expression, which is why in films we rarely see a side view like that for a longer period of time. Instead, they cut back and forth from one character to another, and they all kind of a little bit twisted 3/4 towards the camera, looking slightly past it. This is a classic over-the-shoulder shot reverse shot setup. Back to our drawing. We've put some things in that make it seem like he's facing to the left, but he's not actually three-dimensionally twisted. What we can do to make this character more three-dimensional is to construct it from twisted three-dimensional blocks. Many experienced artists can just freehand draw these blocks to construct their characters from. But they had to learn that first. They had to build a visual library to get this intuition that allows them to just guess how these shapes would look in 3D space. You could do tons and tons of figure drawing, draw humans and animals and pay special attention to how they look as simplified forms. How much of the front plane and the side plane and the top and the bottom plane do you see? Try to construct your drawings from these simplified forms. And once you've done this over and over, one day you'll be able to just draw these 3D blocks from thin air and not use reference. However, there is another method that you can use to construct 3D space, but it's amazing how many beginners have heard about it but don't use it for their characters. I'm talking, of course, about 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective. And while it is true that this is very effective for drawing landscapes and architecture, it's also worth a shot using these guidelines when drawing characters. I'm going to show you an easy way how to draw characters that look decently 3D. Let's have a look at how we can make this chest area more 3D. And I'm going to draw a couple of helper layers. You don't have to work with those all the time. It's just so that it's a little bit easier to understand what is going on. This is the simplified block with which we'll be working with. And at the moment, we are looking at it fully frontal. This is a top-down view of that same form, so it's a bit easier to see what's happening when we twist it. At first, we were only seeing this front plane here. This is what we see in the fully frontal view. But now that we twisted it, we see the front plane, and we're going to see a little bit of the side plane here popping up on this side of the form. Also, this is how wide the form initially appeared. Now that we twisted it, it's actually breaking out of this silhouette, and it now appears to be a little bit wider than it was before, just from twisting it. But we can tell even more from this diagram. If we imagine that there's a camera here, measured from the point of the camera, these edges are now differently close to it. The green edge is now closer to the camera, and anything that is closer to the camera is bigger. The pink line is the furthest away from the camera, so it's going to be the smallest, and the blue line is somewhere in between. It's not quite as far back as the pink line, but it's still going to be shorter than the green line. Now we can connect these, and we already will get a pretty decent 3D form. If we went up to these edges and measured them, they would have the same length. It's only because of the proximity to the camera that one edge looks taller than the other. And just with that knowledge, you can already do pretty convincing forms. Just do longest side, shortest side, not quite so short side, connect them, and you have a decent looking 3D block. You can of course make them taller or wider, really thin or deeper. And all of those look like they could have been constructed from 2-point perspective. And this is exactly what we need to look into next. This is a very special case of 2-point perspective. The top half of the form is above the horizon and the lower half is below the horizon. So we can put the horizon line straight through the middle of this shape. And now we can extend these lines towards the horizon. At the moment they don't meet at the horizon, so I need to correct this a little bit. And where they meet at the horizon, that's where the 2 points are for our 2-point perspective. We could also check the shapes that we freehanded earlier. Oftentimes what you will find is that you have to correct them a little bit. You can see if these meet at the horizon here, the line on the floor here needs to be a little bit lower. Same on the other side. We're taking the top as a guide, and then we can see if the bottom line matches up. And that's actually pretty accurate. That's nice. Before we go on, let's actually see what the benefits are of having this block now. We can make it look a little bit more organic by rounding all the edges, but it's now a lot easier to indicate where the side plane is and where the front plane begins. And you will see that when we switch off the guide layer, we are getting a block that feels pretty 3D-ish. Now let's think about at what position the arm would come out of this block. On the front side, this is fairly easy. It would be around here, and we would have the arm coming down like this maybe. The back side is interesting because it's on the other side of the form. It's here. The place for the shoulder where the arm comes out of it is around here. This is very valuable information for when we draw the back arm, because a lot of it will be covered up by the shape of the body. All of this is not going to be visible because the body is in front of it. So constructing the chest shape from a block worked out pretty well for us. Let's do the same with the head. You will notice that if we use the shortest, longest, not so short line method, we're gonna get blocks that feel 3D at first glance, but they do not fit to the rest of the body. This becomes even more apparent when we also draw a block for the hips and the area where we're going to place the feet. And you can see, especially these top lines have nothing to do with the horizon. But if we have blocks that face the same orientation, are parallel to the ground, these lines should also correspond to that same point of the 2-point perspective. Right now, all the blocks we've drawn went through the horizon, which means that they were at the height of our point of view. Now, if we place blocks above the point of view, we're going to start seeing the underside. If we put it below the point of view, we start seeing the top. Let's construct a hip block that matches up with the chest block that we drew before. If we know where we want the corners to be, we can draw these straight lines here as an orientation. The rest of the lines we get by connecting an edge point with the perspective point on the horizon. So this gives us the side plane right here, and the other point gives us the front plane. But we're also getting a new plane, namely the top plane here. To know exactly where that is, we connect this point with the side plane point from the 2-point perspective, and this one with the front plane point. And there we have the top plane of the hip block. Let's do the same for the head and the area where we are going to place the feet. The head would actually be revealing an underside, but because the head is sitting on top of the body, we cannot look under it. You might also have noticed that this is quite an extreme perspective. We can start drawing our organic shapes within these blocks, but especially at the feet, things will become quite distorted. So what can we do better to have our 3D perspective be less extreme? We can choose points for our 2-point perspective that are further off the screen. And with digital software, this is fairly easy. You just zoom out, and in some software, you can draw outside of the canvas, and you can pick a point that is very far away on the horizon and start drawing your guidelines from that far away point into the canvas. The point that we will be using to construct the front planes with should be further out than the point that we use to construct our side planes. What I might do is create one box for the entire character, just very roughly like this, and I would pay special attention to the floor plane actually, because that will help me a lot to place the feet in a way that makes sense. So I would construct a box like this, and I know that every line inside of this with the same orientation will have to correspond with the topmost and bottommost line of this block. So I can kind of check it by looking at this line and this line. And if I do something like this, I know that this block has nothing to do with the orientation of the other blocks that are aligned with this big box. So let's see how far we get with this. We'll have the block for the head. This is going to reveal a little bit of an underside. I'm going to have the chest block going through the horizon. We have the hip fairly low, and then we're going to place the feet. I guess if I wanted to be very accurate, I could check my lines and see if they line up with the point at the horizon. And I probably will have to make a couple corrections, but I can also see that I wasn't super off in most cases. And now we can put the organic forms inside of this. And what I think is always very important to think about is what is actually on a front plane. So on this front plane for the face, we do have the nose and the eyes. The mustache and the beard are also gonna be aligned with it. Well, the front of the beard. It's curving around and then becoming part of this side plane. And on the side plane, we're gonna have the ear in the middle of it. And the helmet is going to wrap around both of these, the front plane and the side plane. We're going to get a nice rounded chest area here. And once again, we need to connect the arms. So on the hip, I guess we have the belt buckle on the front plane. And if we have a belt, that would wrap around the front and then go to the side all the way around. From there, we can kind of connect the legs. For the foot area, it's important to keep in mind that we see quite a lot of the top side of this shape. So we would see the shoelaces, for example, like that. Personally, I think the block shapes and the perspective lines become distracting very early, and I always switch them off as soon as I have the shapes roughed in. This also makes it a lot easier to see what we still might want to correct. For example, I feel like the arms are not quite how I would like them to be, but this is also because I want to show you another day how you construct the arms. Let's just make them a little bit longer. So now let's compare this with where we came from. This doesn't have any real information about the side planes that are so very important to flesh out the feeling of 3D. So just by adding a couple of blocks, we got a pretty decent 3D looking character design here. Just be aware that it can get a lot more complex than this. All the blocks we've created so far are facing the same direction and are twisted the same amount. In reality, this is very rarely the case. There are a lot of things that can make it more tricky to create your 3D space. Here we have a character laying on the ground, and of course we can construct 2-point perspective, but these 2 points have nothing to do with the horizon because all we see is the ground. The angle of the camera is not the only thing that can be tricky. For example, you could have a bunch of blocks that are all twisted differently, and maybe they're not only twisted but also tilted towards a direction, and then you have to figure out the perspective for each individual block. For example, here the hip is in this classic 3/4 twist, but the upper body is facing us more frontal and leaning forward, which reveals its top plane. The head is tilted up, which reveals its bottom plane. So here we can see the top and bottom of things, and it doesn't have much to do with the height from which we see these forms. We see more from the top or bottom because these forms are tilted and not because of our point of view. Things can get very complex, but since you are only working with cubes in this stage, it's easy to experiment and tweak them and only then start filling in the details later. If you make it a habit to experiment with these simple blocks or pay special attention to these simplified shapes when doing figure drawing from photos or real life, it will get easier and easier to freehand these blocks to plan your character in perspective. If you are a beginner, don't stress out about it. It will get easier over time. I just want you to keep in mind that things have a side plane or reveal the top or the bottom depending on the viewing angle or the twist and tilt. Just trying to use this information will make your drawings better. Tutorials like these are possible because of the generous support of my Patreon supporters. If you want me to make more tutorials like this, please consider supporting me as well. And you can click here if you want to learn 2D animation. It's the best animation exercise for beginners.